excited about the new coffee equipment.
I think
now.
it'll settle down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I won't drink,
That's my
drink
thought.
as much coffee as I have been.
Well, welcome to the podcast. Formally, glad you're here. Today is another exciting episode where last time...
What episode are we on?
7.
7. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
That's a good number.
That's a great number.
Yeah, we can go into that later.
Okay.
But yeah, last episode it was just Cole and I, and today it's just Karl and I. So we're going to chat about...
doing twosies.
Twosies, yeah, exactly. Exactly. So yeah, we'll see if we... get some more guests on this fall maybe, but right now this is going great. And we're going to talk about stories today and all of the things that story entails and kind of dance around that and get the conversation going. But it felt like right going on from some of this technical conversation to maybe zoom out a little bit and talk about maybe what makes us excited about what we do. And maybe we can have a little story time with Karl anyways about why he loves this thing that we're doing.
I remember when I was going through film school, I would come home and practice story on my kids for like bedtime stories.
Oh yeah.
And so some things
this story stinks.
No, like they loved it.
That's so cool.
And I was following one of the principles we're going to get into
Yeah.
about conflict.
Yeah.
It was very hard to do. And
It's a good idea.
They loved it, but it was taxing on me.
Yeah.
I'm like wiped out trying to get them to bed. But
yeah, I mean that's a beautiful thing. I think like that. I mean, even I feel like that's so underrated. Like we I don't know. I don't have kids, and maybe it's because I haven't like thought about a bedtime story since I was 8 or whatever. But that's really cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, it was a good memory. It was fun.
So yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about story and kind of like what story is for people that might want to just to kind of define the word, because I think there's a lot of connotations that come along with the word story. What do we mean by story? Story transcending even film, so let's jump into this.
All right, let's do it.
I think that the first topic I want to kind of throw out here is, why is story so powerful in general to us as humans?
So maybe this is a good place for the McKee quote. I thought this might come up, and maybe sooner is better than later. So Robert McKee, who is a writer, a storytelling expert, he's pretty popular in film circles, does all kinds of story seminars, books he's written. Really, really insightful guy, screenwriter. So there's a quote that I got recently on his email list, and it says, just as glass is a medium for light, air a medium for sounds, language is only a medium for storytelling. Something far more profound than words beat at the heart of a story. So I think that's a great way of saying that it's a communication tool that is communicating far more than just what you're hearing or seeing, right? How can you get the deeper things? And I think that's what we really love about story. I mean, we use stories at all different kinds of levels, funny stories, epics, ads, right?
Right.
But it's a communication tool that is super powerful, and a lot more is being said than just what you see or hear.
And it's like universal,
and
right?
It's universal.
Where we're not just talking about story in terms of like a genre or in terms of artists and writers and creatives or whatever. It's like, no, we all resonate with story. It's a human experience.
We all use it.
Shared thing.
We all identify with it. It's built into us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
When you started the business, you mentioned, we were kind of chatting about this beforehand, that like you went to film school with the intention of like how to use a camera. Like I don't know how to use a camera well enough, so I'm going to go to film school.
Pretty much.
But you left, I think with different takeaways.
Yeah, for sure. I remember going to film school and thinking, because I started the business before I had gone to film school. And I had been reading and studying and lots of technical things about how do you run a camera, right? How do you make this work? How do you edit something? How does editing software even work? And on and on and on. Eventually went full time, and I always say I was 6 months in, And I realized, oh my goodness, I have no idea what I'm doing. It's because you're starting to put all those tools into play and you're just learning and experimenting. And then there's lots of doubts of, am I doing this the right way? And it was one of the things that drove me to film school. And I thought, man, I was so looking forward to the cinematography class. I remember thinking that because I grew up in photography, and, you know, when I got involved in video, it was like just an extension, but expansion of that. And I thought, this is going to be great. I'm going to learn how to do it right.
It's the magic like way to point the camera, and that's what that grades have.
Yeah, you know, I kind of overanalyzed, and exposure. What's the right exposure? And you know, all these things. All that to say, I did learn a lot of technical things for sure, but the thing that maybe probably stuck with me the most, and what I was very surprised to learn, is how much I learned about story itself. You know, I think before that, I might have just had this idea that, like, well, you know, you're just trying to tell something that's interesting. It's interesting to me. It's going to be interesting to somebody else. And you begin to realize that there's a lot more behind it. You start to learn about story structure, and what that means. We were talking, and I said probably one of the biggest takeaways, because we had to write screenplays and you know, do writing projects, and we talk about how every scene has to have conflict. And I remember thinking, really? Is that really true? Come on, you know. And then you start going and watching movies and things, and
look for the conflict. And you know, I pretty much believe it. You know, I mean, there's different levels of conflict. You know, you've got to factor that in. But if it doesn't, like, then kind of why is it there? You know, why is it interesting? How does it move the story forward? And so that's what I would practice with my kids. I remember I'd make believe stories, and I just like, okay, how can I like hook them in,
make this worse, every scene. And like, I don't know where this is going, you know, and it worked. Like, they were dialed into it. Yeah. And I'm like scared of, like, I don't know how this is going to resolve. I got to bring this around somehow, you know.
You're like, children are like, that was a really unsatisfying ending, Dad. Like, you didn't tie up these story plot. Like,
everybody died, right?
These plot holes were outrageous. Yeah. Bad Rotten Tomatoes score for the U for bedtime stories.
Right.
That's really interesting. I think that when the and when I say normal person, I think when the everyday average person thinks about story, I think that you know, and this is true to a certain degree, but like, we just think about, oh, it just needs to be a really good idea from the get-go. And it does, for especially something that you're going to get a lot of mileage out of. But I think a good storyteller can make something simple or otherwise mundane come to life, right? Like, you think of walking down the street and like you think of like the best authors or someone who can capture just like the essence of what it would be like to be there, and it draws you in. And like something that could be as simple as like slight nervousness before a doctor's appointment could feel like you're there, and then there's this major conflict, and like you feel like what it's like to be in that moment, and you can be sucked into that. And so I think that there is a level of, I think that the discretion on the front end of the story thing is this a good enough idea to actually flesh out and pursue, because stories work, is like still true. But I also think that the perception of like, it's this magical thing, and like, once you have this idea, it's like, that's it. It's almost like in the songwriting world, like, oh yeah, someone just like was in the shower and they were just hit with this hit. It's like, or they wrote 500 songs and like know what makes a good song, and like they had a good idea, and it was just like all of the things kind of combined together to like make something that became really popular.
Yeah. Like, when you listen to a good story, you know, it's built in that it's going somewhere, right?
Right.
And how you get there can make that resolve really pay off, can make it a lot richer, or you can tell it in a way that, you know, just doesn't do it justice.
Yeah.
Right. So, I think, you know, we're looking for meaning, and the bigger the point of a story, then the more you should like build it up and give, you know, background information, and, make it interesting to listen to.
Yeah. And there's this interesting like position that we are put in to find the story as well. Like, you know, sometimes we're brought an idea and we have to figure out where the story is, right? Where it's like, hey, we have this goal or this general, the project needs to do this. Like, where's the best way to find the story in this? Connect the dots.
Yeah.
Of like,
yeah,
that's a great idea. But now like the work of the process and of that is like to go heads down and really like see where the beats are.
Especially more doc style projects.
Yeah.
Right. So much of that is found in post, and I particularly enjoy that. And, process for that is usually doing research ahead of time, developing a beat outline of where you think this is going. And I remember for years always saying, like, if we get this, then we know we have something. Hopefully we get something much better than that, because stuff that happens that, you can't anticipate. But I particularly enjoy seeing what we have and what's the best thing that we can make out of that.
Well, and even just thinking about like our lives, this is something, again, we talked about before this, but our lives don't happen in this linear way that story almost presents themselves to happen. So, the cool thing about documentary is that it's, in a sense, it's a taste of reality, but it also is curated reality to the degree where like, no, we're actually maybe taking and distilling this down again to the really important things that do drive this narrative forward. Again, it's the difference between a seasoned documentarian filming something, walking down the street to this doctor's appointment and like making it like this artistic piece of beauty versus like a kid like just trying, like, who knows nothing about story, like just filming like 10 minutes of like someone walking into a doctor's office, or like you can have the same idea, but like there's a lot of stress on the storyteller to really find what beats resonate with them and display that. Yeah,
I think a lot about the term respect your audience, right? When you're telling a story. And to me, that is giving them credit, as listeners, as viewers, that they're smart, intelligent, can draw conclusions. But there's also like a great responsibility to give them something that's worth their time. And, I think, basic structure is like, hook somebody, have a hook in the beginning, capture their attention, find a way to continue to engage them and pull them forward, and then hopefully give them a meaningful resolve at the end. And so, as you're thinking through scenes and, plot points, like they all should be doing that. They should be moving people forward. They should be inherently interesting. How do you film a person? There's plenty of things where it's like, we need to get this person from A location to B location. How do we do that in a way that's interesting?
Yeah. And some of that's medium and some of that's story, which is cool. And we'll get to that, I think, a little bit later, but, this might be a different way to look at some of these same things, but what's a good way to buzzkill a story? I just liked that kind of frame of like, I'm not normally a negative framing kind of guy, but I just like, what's a good way to like really ruin a good thing? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Give it away, is the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that so much, but
it's maybe the opposite of what we've been talking about.
Yeah. You're always trying to find original ways to do things and
make it about you. Like, that's one thing that comes to my mind is like, I think that it's easy for us as storytellers to like really try and do something revolutionary and like, oh, like there's all these clever things that are going to be about me. And then it like gets to the point where it's so convoluted that the audience is like, this wasn't like, it's almost like not even written for the audience at that point. Right.
Yeah. That's a danger. People always talk about writing yourself into a story, But I think like this is a podcast about commercial film production, right? So we're kind of off in this narrative world right now and doc world. But that's a principle at play for us too, right? Of making sure we're serving the client with the story and not making what we want it to be. We want to add value by using our sensibilities and skills and training and all that to make it told well. Yeah. We don't want to hijack it.
I think one of the things that we were kind of jamming on as well was this idea of know where this, in the commercial sphere, know where this fits into not only, the format that we're making, but also the larger story that, that is being told for the brand, right?
Yeah.
Where, we are just one piece of that puzzle. And it's an important piece and the project's important, but, it helps, our team realize like, what is this serving and what's the point of this? How much, what piece of the story is this? Does this need to be a whole epic thing and
Absolutely,
like, you know, really pull things forward? Or is this just like one little snapshot of this larger, you know, maybe brand campaign that's being sold or put out there, right? Where like that's already thought about. We're just executing, right? That was one of the things we were talking about.
Yeah. Is this an ad that is part of a larger ad campaign where it's going to be printed and billboard and, you know, other kind of things? And, you know, how does it fit within that? I just think that's part of the process. Like when we engage a client, is all those questions we ask about we call it our SIB, strategic input brief. You know, that really is a creative brief. Some people come with those things already answered, but all the questions about audience and purpose and communication points. And it's like all helping us understand, you know, what is the right story to be told with this piece, and then what isn't, right? What's the world we need to live in? And
that is, I have this question here about like repeatable results within story and like how we're these creatives, but also like business people and the marriage of like business and story. Yeah. And how do we do that repeatably, right? Like how do we get up every day and not just wait for inspiration to strike out of the clouds and like all of a sudden go make a great film? It's like know the process enough to be able to start there every day when we wake up and continue things forward and do that repeatedly, which is why people come to us. Yeah.
We had some language, I think, on our website one time about how people were our inspiration. Kind of talking about the meaning of Taproot in different levels. And I still think about, I think that's true. Like, I think it's fun to hear somebody who has an idea, or a product or service, whatever that is, and to come around then and begin to understand, okay, what are you trying to accomplish with this? What's, you know, what's the point? And then put that in a way that, you know, is going to work for them. Like it's going to be shared with whomever. I think it's hard to come up with something from nothing. Right. And, clients come to us and they've got something. We help define the constraints further. Like constraints are super important in a project, in a story. But you know, the idea you have like is what triggers my mind, right? The product service thing you're bringing is what, serves as inspiration for me to come up with an idea of how to tell that.
It's like it's been a theme of this podcast, but like the creative dictates everything, right? The idea is everything. Like everything after that is like, because of that idea, this is why we're doing every little thing, every little decision that we're making in this process. As a director, where do you find story and projects that seem to have nothing to do with story?
You know, so we do all kinds of projects, right? 6-second ads, 30-second spots, 3-minute promos, and documentaries, you know, so I think we try to operate from a standpoint that everything has to have a story. And, you know, you can tell a story in 6 seconds, right? It's a whole different thing. But I think, you just got to push yourself to like, I always think of hooks, right? It's one of the biggest things for me is like, how do you, especially in the ad world where you're trying to capture attention, you're trying to capture it quickly. How can we find something that, you know, is going to make people stop for a second, right? And then hopefully you then take the next step of like keeping them moving forward. So the constraints are brought by, you know, the type of product it is, what the need is. Like there's just things that aren't going to work, you know, for a hospice organization. Right.
I will say I tend to lean on like comedy hooks. We both went there. I always have these really absurdist ideas for stuff that's completely inappropriate for like the client that we would be on, that just I joke about with the team, like just crazy, like, oh, it'd be so funny if we did something like this, and then like it would not at all work for what we're doing, but that's part of the joke in my mind. But yeah, I mean, I think
what's your answer to that?
I think for me, you know, one of the things I was going to respond to about what you said was like format is such a big deal. You know, I think constraints, but like even format, how are people going to consume this? And then what amount of story can we like fit in that right length? How are people going to consume this? What's the context? because it's such a difference when you have a 60-minute feature doc and someone's sitting down to watch it, and the attention that they give that, and the patience they have for the story to develop and all of that, versus, like you said, like the ad world is like, we got 6 seconds, 15 seconds, whatever the average is, right, online to like get our point across and to do what we get in, do what we're supposed to do, get out.
That's a great point. Like, do I have a captive audience or not?
Yeah.
Right. A TV spot, you have a little more captive audience, right? You can't control it. Obviously they can get up for snack break or whatever, but people sit through commercials, they're watching a show, they're invested. Online, not, usually it's skipping the ad. When can I skip?
Yeah.
So really important for us to know.
Yeah. I think that, the thing that I think about, like in the world that I work to, is a lot more like direct to client and, smaller ad world stuff, which tends to be a little bit more similar with the process. But, I'm always looking for like one thing that I think could like really elevate the project. Whether that's story or creative or something that like, it's not like hijacking the project, but really like a perspective that like, oh, this is a great idea. Like maybe there's one thing that we can like do that would really like, for our clients to come to us, like make a difference for like coming to us versus someone else. Is like, yeah, you could go anywhere and someone could just do what you want them to do, right? There's a lot of people who can execute on projects, but
I mean, that could be like using a specialized lens.
Yeah.
Right. We just used a probe lens on a shoot, and you can get really close to things like keyboards and, those shots that look like you're in the ant's world,
right,
kind of thing. Like, that's a storytelling technique, right? I mean, it's a way to capture attention and draw attention to something.
Completely different perspective.
Emphasize perspective, right? Yeah, all those things.
Yeah. So I think for me, I'm still not directing a ton of stuff. So I think that, I always have a lot of ideas, but I'm looking at them a lot more from like a producing side, or kind of the beforehand side of like setting up the project. So I don't know. I feel like we've done that really well, and I think that's something that it's probably something we do naturally, just as like our goal to make the project as good as it can be. And I think that that's why people keep coming back to us, is because like time and time again, it's just one little thing that like twists the project and like what is way better than, than if we would have just taken things at face value and just executed and like gotten paid and moved on. Yeah. It's like really putting the time in to think through it. And
that takes effort.
I think it's time and process and effort.
It takes investment of time.
Stay in it.
Stay in it. Yeah. And it's hard because like you said, you're running a business. You're not usually getting paid for that.
Yeah.
But when you do it, it is a thing that people notice. And I think that, we've won a lot of jobs because of that, right?
Yeah.
It's like you've done the extra step, the extra mile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to zoom out again. We talked a little bit about the commercial thing, but I have more to ask you personally, which you'll love.
All right. Back to the interview.
Well, no, we can talk about this more conversationally, but, why are you passionate about story? And maybe a caveat to that is, what is like your first memory or experience of like really being deeply impacted by story? Because we talked about like you going to film school. I think if people watch this episode or watch this podcast, they would know that this was kind of a second career for you. I think we talked about that earlier on and kind of that process, but
it's become part of my story. I talk about it all the time.
Well, now, I mean, you've got it down to
it is a thing, like
level of detail.
Talk about like finding yourself older. Like you say the same things again and again and again.
This is who I am, right? Where like when you're 20, you're like, I don't know who I am. I'm not defined by my past experiences. And then you're like older, you're like, I'm defined by my past experiences.
Totally. I so found myself like, so many times, like, what's the right level to tell this story at, and when I was like younger, just like everything, you got to hear the whole thing,
That's so funny.
And I was like, not anymore. So what
You're
was
like,
it?
I don't have a lot of breath left. I'm going to save it.
Yeah. First impact.
Why are you passionate?
Yeah. It's kind of weird.
What led you to be passionate about story in the first place?
It's strange because sometimes I'm like, how did I get in this industry? I was a business major in college, business and economics, right? And, but it's probably part of my answer to this is like trying to figure out my own journey, right? And certain expectations of how life should go. And then when it didn't, when I was met with conflict and struggles, like why, trying to find meaning out of that. So I think, the ability to look back and connect the dots of your life in a way that's like, has some direction to it. This is going somewhere. Like, to me, like that's very powerful. I think it gives meaning to life. I think we're all trying to do that in some fashion, and so I just resonate with that and trying to find ways to do that in work that we do. Again, it's very different, depending on the project.
Right.
But you could probably see the things that I'm better at, as a director, and that I'm drawn to. I think you'll see those kind of elements in them. Is that an answer?
Yeah, no, that's good.
Anything?
No, I think so. And I think another thing along those lines is, perspective even in our own lives for where we're at in the story and like patience for that. Right. Yeah. Because I think that it's really easy to get wigged out about either a present circumstance or a future challenge that's approaching or a past failure even, and like allow ourselves to be presently defined by those things. But I think that a really healthy thing, and I almost relate this to like finding context for a project, like project discovery. It's like, got to put some constraints on this and then like zoom out and look at what purpose did these things have in my life and what's the story here and what's a good story without conflict in every scene.
Right.
But like we look at our own life and we go, why are things hard?
It should be constantly up and to the right.
And generally it is. I would say, like, I think generally
if you zoom out far enough.
Yeah. If you zoom out far enough, like, even the biggest valleys of our lives are still better than where they might have been. And that's definitely a generality. But, I think for a lot of us, we get really, worked up about like focused on the present circumstance and, to the point where we like don't appreciate where we're at or where we're heading or what's going on in our lives or what our worst failure brought us and how we would have never gotten there without it. Like you could look at any great story arc and like trace the character and like they wouldn't be who they were without their worst failure. Like even the thing that like is so uncomfortable, either whether you're watching a movie or reading a novel, and like the parts that make you squirm and you're like, man, I hope that this gets resolved, or like this was really difficult for this character, and you really resonate with that. We had
that client call this morning where it was a younger client and he had started business and had crazy success early on, but wasn't prepared to handle it and ended up shutting down the business because he was starting to go upside down. And now he's like cautiously re-entering. And I think I was trying to encourage him, it's like, I'm a few years older than you are. Like this is like classic entrepreneurial type of stuff. Like you've learned so much through a failure, and now you're going to come back, better equipped. And, he's still in the middle of it. Right. And very uncertain and tentative, but stepping forward. And I'm like, oh man, dude, like just keep going. You're on the right track.
It's interesting how we, sometimes lack either the time or self-awareness to recognize those things in our own lives.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of us get into this thing because like for some personal thing, and then we realize that like we have the opportunity to really like use our skills that we've developed maybe just under the pressure chamber of our own experiences in life to like make a business and provide value to other people who want to do the same thing, but might not have gone down the same path we did. So how has your view of story changed as you've like aged and grown as a storyteller, filmmaker, person, dad, whatever? How has your view of story changed maybe from when like even you got into film to today, and what's the trajectory? Has it changed?
Yeah. I remember an early project where I was trying to set up something early in the story. It was kind of a doc type project. And the story was about an educator who had moved into a disadvantaged neighborhood and started a school there. And he was so committed to the community that, he wanted to live there. He wanted to live there and be part of it. And he is and still does. He's been there for decades. And so I was trying to tell this story where in the beginning, when you first meet this character, he's at somebody else's house. They're having a dinner party and people are arriving, and he goes and answers the door for one of the guests. And you're kind of like, oh, this is what I'm thinking people are saying. This must be his home. But then you realize later on, he leaves the house. He travels across town, literally the other side of the tracks. There's a shot going across the tracks. And he pulls into this neighborhood that we have seen at some point in the story. And he pulls into this house and he goes inside. And it's kind of supposed to be this big reveal, I want people to be like, oh my goodness, he lives here. I didn't realize that. He's doing all this work with, these kids and stuff. And he himself lives there.
Yeah.
And, I thought it was so obvious. And I remember showing it to people that I was working with on the project, and they were like asking me to explain what happened. And so I'm telling them and sharing like, don't you see it? And these are people who knew story, and what I realized is like, it's as obvious as it can be to you. It's just not always as obvious to other people, and people watch with different levels of interest. And, especially if you're at home and competing with other things, versus a movie theater or whatever. So you can't control that. So I think, we've talked about like stuff that's on the nose versus stuff that isn't, and stuff that's more artistic. And, do you create stuff that people watch multiple times? And, there are films that are, the best films are kind of designed that way, and you pick up more each time you watch it. And like understanding the balance of all those things for the medium and the project, I think is one thing that I've had to learn. And, coming out of film school, it's like, don't be on the nose with anything. Don't be on the nose. So I was really, trying not to be, and I went too far that way.
I don't think that's uncommon.
Yeah.
It's just like this deep dive into the advanced concepts of like filmmaking, or like, every student film has to do with time travel or like some sort of like inception dream. Like, everything was a dream. Like like, I don't know. I feel like that's very like common. And I think that's a good thing, because you have to try those things. I think those are great things to try.
You realize like things like audience testing and how important feedback is.
But again, like I think the question that I get and or think about is like the balance between making it for the audience, right, and appropriateness for the audience, and making it for yourself. And I think that like maybe the thing with student films or with inexperienced filmmakers, or like this desire to make these like crazy stories right off the bat, is a lot of times like it gets carried away. Like, it's like really great because I understand and I'm really pleased with how I did this, and it's interesting to me and all of those things. But I think that a really successful project is the balance of like simplicity, effectiveness, art. It's like all of it's like the right beats at the right time and the right amount. It's like a master chef who knows just amount of the right amount of spice to put into a dish to get the little bit of kick that's needed for that dish to be interesting, but not overdo it so that it's disgusting.
Yeah. I think, there are different kind of formats that we work in, as we've been talking about, but structures from, 3-act structure to, models like Hero's Journey and Saving the Cat and things like that. And I think some of those just become ingrained in you, where you're not so super conscious of them. You just realize, oh, this has got to get better. Oh, this, it's got to change. As you're working on the project, we've spent enough time here. Let's move on to the next thing. So I guess those are kind of general ideas, but in terms of like how it's changed for me, like you just over time, as you do with anything, you know, you realize what works, what doesn't. And they're based on storytelling principles. Like the idea of withholding information is something I know I do all the time. I'm not so consciously thinking about it, but even how you cut a little scene or a couple of clips together, or you're looking at one versus the other and making a decision, and like, that's just a basic storytelling
what
principle.
lens to use for the same exact thing too. Like how much context do I want to show here? Like it could be the same exact shot, but like even just like those little decisions impact what options you have in the edit, and then like what feels right.
When do you bring the wide shot in?
Yeah.
Right. Am I saving that? Is there a reason? Does it need to be establishing shot?
Yeah. Is it too vague? Is there not enough context?
Does that feel like enough end to that scene? So those things, just over time, doing it again and again and getting feedback and trying to get better.
Basically, you're just a master, sensei.
Oh, I do not feel that way at all. When we talked about this whole storytelling project, I was like, Nate, it is not me. I feel like if I was like a story guy, I'd be a writer.
Yeah.
And I do some of that in a way, but
you're an editor too. Yeah. And a director. Yeah. Right. And I think like, when you think of people on a film set that are really the story masters, I think of directors, writers, and the unsung heroes that we mentioned last episode, editors, right? Where you're really bringing that story to life.
That's probably definitely the part that I like the most about what we do.
Yeah.
Right. Is like that story and what's the point of this whole thing? What's the meaning? Does it communicate it? And when you work with other people and, you're constantly asking the question, you show it to somebody, does this work?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that's working, it's just,
don't change it. That's
great.
Or
you develop a mutual sense of when something works and doesn't. And, just doing that again and again.
There is a communal aspect of that too. That's like less, individualistic too. Like even, as our team grows, that culture and that level of mutual understanding of like taste, and like obviously there's still individuality within it, but there's also like a probably a Taproot taste that starts to develop, and like where we start to really understand like does that feel like us even?
Yeah.
Like that's a question that sometimes is like,
yeah, that's true.
Like, does that feel like us or is that not?
Yeah. Like sensibilities.
Yeah.
Artistic sensibilities. Certainly storytelling sensibilities.
So kind of on that topic, we've talked about story in a lot of vague ways, and obviously through the lens as filmmakers, but why film as a storyteller? There's so many different medias, but why film as a medium?
Yeah. So, for me, I started in photography, just as a hobby when I was young in high school, and, loved it. But I kind of got bored with it. I remember starting in actual film photography, and doing that for a long time, and loved it. And then there was a period where I kind of hung it up for a while, and I don't know, I'm busy, trying to, my work world had started and all that. But I remember when digital cameras came out, and it kind of reinvigorated again. For me, it just there's no money that was tied to it, right? You could just take as many as you want, not processing fees and all that. But then when I got involved with film and video, it was like, oh my goodness, like all the variables just, multiplied. So just, and not as though you can't tell stories in photography, obviously, right? And incredible photographers, but it's just a different thing. For me, I loved, how you could tell a story and you use the elements of, the visuals and sound design and music and color and, lens choices and framing and camera motion and on and on and on. Like there's just like, this infinite number of variables. And to me, it felt like I was not going to ever get bored doing it.
Yeah.
I think you made a similar comment to me one time when you started because you came from music side, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Like, and it's not a dig on any other medium, but I think the thing that I keep finding interesting about film is that I coin it as the ultimate medium, where it's just the combination of it all. It's where it all meets. And, at the highest level, everybody's putting the same amount of time as like the experts would be on all of those like things. And obviously, there's different levels of production value where you some projects don't have like a dedicated sound designer because, or a Foley artist because there's just not budget for it.
Yeah.
But some, on the highest level of film and art, you have like just teams of people that are only doing that. And then the culmination is this just distilled project of this medium that condenses everything down into this like beautiful symphony of different, artists and, but like business people and like the economic value. And like, it's so cool to like, I don't know, the thing I think that for me with film was like just coming up with a creative idea on a project and then opening my eyes and be like, oh, there's 12 people today like working on this thing. And like, that's so cool. Like, and that was like on the smallest end when I was just starting to get into it. And then, that obviously multiplies where you're like, man, you work on something, you're emailing every day for 3 months. And then you get on set and you're like, wow, this is like, this is really cool. Just the community, the thing that's like bigger than, obviously you could spend a lifetime and not master like how to play the perfect drum beat, like that's still noble and it's still difficult. And there is that nuance, but, when you zoom out and, I think probably the thing that we have in common in a lot of filmmakers is that, we want to almost do it all, or we like it all to a certain degree, where like, if we were only doing one of those things, like, then we might feel like it's just a level of like deep dive that like we don't necessarily want to take because it would take away from an experience of something else.
Yeah.
I don't know if you feel that way, but
I do. And then there's also a little bit of the fear of being locked into something. What if I had to do this thing only forever?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Level of simplicity that's craved sometimes when you have to manage all of the aspects of it, but it keeps things interesting. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's funny, like every project, that kicks off, it's like there's a new level of enthusiasm and you're not thinking about the one that's been going on for 3 months and you're trying to wrap up like already, let's get this thing out of here.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, a new one. Let's go.
Yeah. It's all a cycle too.
Yeah.
Right. And I think like, I love, and this, I guess, is like maybe further proof that story's ingrained in us, but I love seasons and like cycles of life of like, fall being like this, things are cooling off and like this bonfire weather and like the whole vibe of fall and the thoughts that come with it and the inspirations that come with the leaves changing and the cool breeze through the air. And then, you get to winter and there's 3 feet of snow on the ground and you got a fire inside and you're looking out the window and there's frost on the window and you're drinking a hot cup of coffee and you're dreaming about warmer weather so you can go do things again.
Right.
The thaw of winter where new life starts to sprout again. And then summer where it's like chaos because everyone's preparing for or doing everything.
Yeah.
So there's a level of that with film, like that. It's like, through the process, you almost go through seasons in every project where each one of those things are kind of hit, a shoot days like summer where you're like, okay, it's time to go like get this stuff and get it going. And then, so there's a level of like, it's tiring and it's like a lot of work and, but there's a level of joy in the process of creating a story that comes from just an appreciation for each moment of that. And by the time you get through, post-production, you're ready to start like the ideation process on a new thing that's completely different. And I think that's what keeps me interested with film. Cause it keeps you on your toes in that way because each project brings you different places and I don't know. I think
that's a good connection to make. As much as I always kind of have this thing with my wife for summertime, like, oh, I just love summer. Like, and I tell her multiple times during the summer, and then every year I tell her again, like, I tell you how much I love the summertime. But if it was endless summer, as much as I think I want that, you wouldn't appreciate it as much. Probably wouldn't.
Maybe like I could do like an Asheville, North Carolina type season where like you just have a bit longer summer and longer spring and fall and a little bit shorter of a winter, still get all 4 seasons. I could do that. But I like Grand Rapids. I like West Michigan. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. I always tell people, it gets smoking hot down there, man. It does. Yeah. Well, Asheville's a little higher in the elevation, so maybe a little less than like Charlotte, but, So another thing that came to mind that I wanted to ask you about was this idea of incorporating, like, we've been talking a lot about just general story principles. I think the lens has been broad, but, you know, maybe the implication was more like documentary narrative formats.
Yeah.
Tell me about how you try to incorporate those types of elements into like commercial film work, right? As like maybe as a characteristic of your work, our work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, again, film school is such a basis for me. And so much of that was about narrative filmmaking, you know, making movies. And when I started doing doc style kind of stuff, that was novel. I was just ignorant, you know. I'm like, hey, I'm going to like see if I can bring these same principles and ideas to, you know, doc style storytelling. And it's a bit you know, once you kind of finally get into it, it's like storytelling. But for whatever reason, there was some kind of difference, you know, in my mind. Things aren't as contrived, I guess. You know, it's all written and script driven versus documentary stuff where you do planning, but you're also having to just make some stuff up. And so you can't control these setups and payoffs. But that's why so much happens.
It's like jazz music.
That's not a bad comparison.
You like know what song you're playing, but like you don't know where it's headed.
That's right. And those things really come into play in post. Right now, you really have to make them. Why am I watching this? Right. So I think those same. It's a little bit what we did talk about before. You know, setups and payoffs and withholding information and hooks and all the tools and techniques we have that from an equipment standpoint that can add to something. And you know, the commercial space can be. Sometimes it's just is this a creative idea? I mean, so many ads are just like the bigger, more mature brands become about, you know, aspirational type of things. They can become about comedic, you know, kind of things or up your alley. So you're like looking to ways to hook people, right? Capture attention, fire them up, like, and have something that, you know, speaks to people, right? They can find meaning in that or identify with that. So yeah, all those things, apply just as much in the commercial space. You're trying to communicate. Yeah. It's always said in the beginning, you're trying to communicate more than what you are.
So for everybody, who knows what we do, you know, we've this year, especially, I think started to narrow down on 3 different types of, verticals. I mentioned them earlier, Josh kind of managing the larger agency projects. And myself focusing on direct to client and, you know, smaller agencies. But the thing that like even us coming on board here that has allowed you to focus more on, which just thinking about this in terms of kind of getting back to the things that brought you into filmmaking in the first place is this idea of, original storytelling, you know, and whether that's doc style, or right now we have the opportunity to do that through a project with a client. It is more doc style and we have a lot of leeway there, which is great. But I think it'd be great to talk a little bit more about what's brewing and, obviously, stuff's still brewing, but, I think it'd be great to kind of chat about that a little bit.
Yeah. I think that, it's been a dream of mine for sure. And, I think, feels like the timing is starting to become right. We're more mature as a business and, you know, my role is changing and looking at, you know, kind of, okay, what's the next 10, 15 years looking like kind of stuff. What do we want to do? How we want to, you know, build the company, what direction we want to take. And, it is kind of in this longer format / original content, meaningful content type of space. And, I think that is, you know, clients that would come to us more like we want to commission you almost kind of an idea, or we need a film project for this. This just isn't an ad or, you know, an informational video. Like this story needs to be told because story is the right mechanism, for what we need. Right. That like we're working on with a client on that right now.
It's almost more of like a muse type relationship versus like a client type relationship where it's like, hey, we have this idea. We want to hire you for like you as an artist almost.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. You know, what was interesting, like they came in and we had this introduction and it's the kind of get to know you meeting, and okay, what are you guys looking to do? And they started talking about what they're all about. And I made a comment. I remember said, wow, this sounds like a film project. And the director actually said to me, he goes, yeah, because that's what we were thinking too. And I was very excited about that, of course. But, you know, I think we're using all of this kind of same tools that we use in commercial work of, okay, let's create a strategic input brief or a creative brief, and let's, you know, figure out how you're going to use this thing and what really needs to be told and what's, you know, key to your audience, and what are the stories that are available to tell. And so I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be really cool. And then I don't know, it just kind of seems like there's several things that have popped up recently. A couple in the sports world, about doing some stories about some higher profile athletes, and but it's not just the like story of their career. You know, it's one is more started with like, you know, what are the athletes' family experience during this, again, higher profile athletes, you know, games and career and trips. And that was kind of the idea that this is all developmental early stage, but those are this is how these things are being presented to us. And so yeah, I'm really excited about that. I think the challenge has been, you know, those things are slower developing. They take time, not always great money makers, you know, when you have family and things like that. And so it's cool to see how the business has grown, and it's affording me time to spend on these things and develop those. And, you know, I think what's cool is like all the team is involved in that, though, or will be at different points in time. And, so to me, it's very much one Taproot, with kind of 3 different verticals. Yeah. And, you know, the other thing is like, we're all kind of at different stages here in our careers. You know, where I am in, and you and Cole are, and Josh, and, just how I can see how like the interest levels, are different at different stages, having gone through that myself. And, and then even how like the sensitivities and sensibilities that people bring just because of the world they grew up in, you know, like those are really valuable. And like, I'm excited about like making that all come together. Right. So it's very cool. And it's a weird thing for me because I've always been the planning guy and the security guy, and how do we make sure that we're not going to go under guy, you know, and this is a solid business move. And
so far so good.
Well, so far so good. Like, but I almost feel like it's a thing that, you know, obviously it's a desire and passion of mine. But I don't have a lot of control over it. And just like I said, it kind of feels like maybe this is the right time, because things are just starting to kind of appear a little bit. And all the work that we've done, you know, helps and benefits that, but, it builds competency and confidence for people, you know, to maybe approach us. Right.
Well, and you know, we talked about this a lot actually in our Monday morning meeting.
Right. That's what I was thinking about too.
Where like opportunity meets preparedness. Yeah. And is this providence, or is this due us because we've been working hard for so long? You know, and we could devolve into that conversation. But even just this podcast, I mean, not to break the fourth wall, but you know, thought leadership, and like, what does it look like to use these skills to continue to further projects that like we want to make, and that we think are important to the world, and to bring value in that way, not only serving our clients with valuable and meaningful projects, but to serve the world with like what we would say, or ideas that we see as valuable. And it's great that it's like within the bounds of, you know, like it's interesting, different levels, and you get these ideas in your heads about what those should or shouldn't be. And, you know, I think the cool thing that we've kind of landed on is like, well, let's just handle what's in front of us. Right. And I think that piece that comes with that, to, you know, we have this awesome project that we're working on right now that we kind of, you know, referenced earlier, where it's like, this is a film and we've got a budget for it. And like, we want to hear your ideas, guys. Like, come, like, let's make this great. You know, it's like, man, that just makes us come alive, you know, and like, we're really grateful for that opportunity. And, you know, there's a lot of other things that have been brewing, and like, you've been working on some projects for a long time. It's like, man, like, what does that mean for those? And then like, it's cool to kind of just say, well, like, let's just crush this thing. And, it's part of what's made the commercial side successful too, right? It's like every project that comes alongside or comes up, we just like, let's just crush it and do our best. And then the next one will come, and obviously we'll work to develop things, but take it as it comes. And
because, you know, people are all different places and stages and, you know, in their careers and in their jobs, and people have dreams. And, you know, so this relates back to story for me, right? This is like why I got into this thing in the first place. And there were years where I'm just like paying the bills and I'm learning like crazy too. And, you know, supporting the family. And I'm just like, wow, I didn't really think this is why I got into this, you know, like this is where I am. And they're, you know, they're just seasons. And, you know, okay, so I can go a step deeper, right? The name of Taproot is actually Kairos, right? So the LLC is called Kairos Media LLC, DBA Taproot Pictures. So Kairos. So
if you get an invoice from Kairos, pay it. It's from Taproot. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
JK.
Yeah. If you're a client, you eventually
JK, but not really. You know who you are. I'm just joking.
But you know, that name was meaningful to me. Some people know what that is. It's a Greek word that basically means kind of like the right moment, or like almost has a divine connotation to it. And I felt that way because I always wanted to do my own business, had kind of given up on that. And then I got into video production, like, oh my goodness, this is it. And this is after I'd had kids, you know, you know, I was like, this is not the right time, but it is, you know, let's go. And, so it was the right moment despite all the circumstances. So I guess to encourage people, like, I'm not in control of how my life is going to end. Right. And I don't know the time and place, but I have trust that, there are dreams that are in me for a reason. And, having those come out, at the right time is what I want to have happen. Right. Because I think, you know, if you're looking for that, you know, all the stuff leading up to that is preparation. And, like, so not to let go of those things, it might, you know, feel like that at times, or it might take longer, but, you know, things change in life, you know, and circumstances change, whether, you know, we go out and, you know, do something, or it's forced upon us because we lose our job or whatever. So this is the story, right? Our lives are story. I think that, you know, the chapters that we don't know about can be very exciting and just as meaningful. You know, culture teaches, you know, hey, you're going to retire at this age and you should be moving on and whatever. And it's like, you know, some of the, you know, most amazing businesses and most mature people I know are, things happened, you know, well into after 50, right?
Yeah.
There's a really well-known author, that made a comment about how he didn't want to start writing books. He was actually a speaker now, well-known author. He said didn't want to start writing books until he was 50 years old because he didn't really know anything, and didn't want to put it down in writing, you know, until then. You know, so when you're 20 something, it's like, what? That's forever.
Maybe I should delete my Facebook. I'm just
Well, it makes you think about stuff like this that like live out there, you know.
Man, we live in such a fast-paced society of like, you got to like, I want to be 18 and a millionaire, and I want to like come up with this idea, and like I want, and it's because there's this pressure to like strive and achieve, and like achievements aren't bad in and of themselves, but we've idolized them, and it's become like this level of at all costs. And
if it's not the hockey stick, you know, on the graph, then like you're a failure. And like these companies that endure forever have done this slow, steady, you know, like they've grown, they've matured, they're
growing the right way. Right. Like it's not just about doing things, it's about doing them in the right way.
Yeah.
And there is cliche around this, but like it's not worth doing if it's going to be fast and quick and sloppy. You know, like the right things are worth doing slow, and they take time. Good things take time. Yeah. A wise man once said yesterday, everyone wants to communicate something to create change, wants to put forth good ideas, and story is an incredible way to do that. A true story doesn't have an agenda, and a real story allows people to find themselves in it. The storyteller takes an inherent risk and has a point and something to get across, but if they ram it forward too hard, then they lose their audience. Karl Koelling.
That's quite a quote. Were you recording that, or did you?
I wrote it down word for word in our conversations preparing for this.
I didn't know you were doing that. That was fast writing for you.
I'm a quick typer. Shout out middle school typing class. But I think I want to leave y'all with that because, look at your story look at your life as a story in and of itself. The right time will come for you to seize opportunities. Opportunities will come. Be prepared. Be ready to take them, but don't force them, because then your story will become cliche and you'll lose people.
I'm done. Mic drop.
Sweet. Later, y'all.
Thanks.